We skipped breakfast that morning because we were so excited to finally get on the road after 2 days of wandering through the city and sleeping off our jet lag. A few miles south of Seattle we realized with grumbling stomachs that this hadn't been a great idea though, and we stopped at a subway due to a lack of better alternatives in the immediate area. Because this was a road trip, we ate our sandwiches in the car in the parking lot of the restaurant, and I remembered how they tasted different than in Europe. When we reached the Pacific coast, it started to rain and get misty on the empty coastal highways. The dim light and humid air made the green oceanside flora appear even more lush, like an ancient enchanted forest stretching right up to the steep shore. Not used to driving past plenty of tsunami evacuation route signs, it felt as if danger was always just around the corner, cleverly hiding behind beautiful vistas luring unsuspecting travelers into the abyss. My mind wandered off to scenarios of hammering our rental car up the hills, tidal wave in the rearview mirror, and the landscape around us dramatically sinking into the ocean. We took a break at Cannon Beach and walked the wet sand for an hour or so, letting the wind mess with our hair and wondering about the true value of beachfront real estate in an area like this. The cheap motel had been alright, in the sense that it provided an experience like in a typical American road movie, where the guests have more important things on their mind than burnt-out light bulbs, uneven flooring, and saggy old mattresses, as they are probably on the run from some sort of law enforcement or the exact opposite. While this wasn't the case for us, as far as we knew, we still enjoyed the dubious flair of the accommodation and chalked it up to one of those things that one had to do once on a trip like this. We even witnessed the authentic cockroach in the bathroom and silently waited out an unknown person banging on our window at 2 a.m. The sky had cleared up to a cloudless blue, and the ocean's majestic waves clashed forcefully with the sharp cliffs at the Rocky Creek scenic viewpoint. We sat down right on the edge with our feet dangling above the carnage, and watched whales in the distance as they slowly made their way up north. On my trips to the United States, it was always nature that left the most profound mark on me, and I already knew that this time it wouldn't be any different. In the tiny town of North Bend, the very welcoming owner of an itty-bitty inn with the same appropriate name introduced us to growlers and the local craft beer culture. He sent us off for a taste to the small convenience store across the street, where we were surprised to find over 30 beers on tap. Sipping from the heavy brown paper bag, we watched the sunset over Coos Bay, until it got cold and we decided to try at the local Italian restaurant. Good pizza. They probably had been over 600 miles behind us when we realized how the outdoors had gradually changed, from green humid Washington to yellowish dry California. The trees had different shapes here too, towering high above everything mysteriously. They must have withstood the Earth's forces for ages, and it felt like they were not part of the land, but the land with all of its creatures was simply an insignificant part of them, loosely covering their massive, mile-long mazes of roots. When a tree fell here, it definitely made a sound, and when it has finally withered away after centuries, it will still have outlived us all. Driving south from cold Lake Tahoe, the highways led us further into California. We had left the coast long behind, which was not only indicated by the dry climate, but also the significantly higher gas prices, which, to be fair, were still a joke compared to Europe. Ha ha. Still, paying almost twice as much per gallon than west of Yosemite was an odd thing to encounter for naive tourists like us. The town we were going to spend the night in was basically just a few dirt roads branching off the highway. There was a closed gift shop, a burger grill, our cozy family-run motel, and not much more when we arrived in the early afternoon. Apart from us, there was only one other guest occupying the adjacent room. His door was wide open and we could hear his TV loudly. Glancing in as we walked by, we spotted him clumsily handling a hard liquor bottle while lying flat on his bed, almost passed out drunk. We didn't hear him again when we returned after a walk through the desert, and his dusty pickup truck full of tools and small machinery was gone early next morning. Following recommendations from family members who had visited the place separately in the previous 2 years, lunch was had in the Bishop's Petite Pantry Mexican restaurant, where an iguana lived in the back and the tortilla chip starter plate already foreshadowed delicious home-cooking style main dishes and huge portion sizes. We were quickly included in a chat between other guests and the owner, and it seemed more like a living room get-together than a restaurant visit, sitting in our worn-out office chairs underneath the walls plastered with newspaper articles about the owner's children's athletic achievements. valley is really just a huge geographical inconvenience. It's interesting how entertaining driving straight through nothing can be, I guess. The tremendous heat and no shadows for miles is nothing new, or something one couldn't imagine vividly without the need to be there in person. Feeling oddly generous, we switched off the AC as advised by the road signs, and thus shared the burden of the blazing sun with our rental car, which almost felt like a good family friend by now. We congratulated and thanked it wholeheartedly after finishing the long climb out of the valley, and promised it that oil change the onboard computer kept nagging us about after 1,000 miles on the road. I don't recall if we ever sent the auto shop's bill to the rental car company, but while we waited, we had lunch at Wendy's, which was not at all what I thought I remembered it to be. Not to McDonald's. My last contact with the franchise had been exactly 16 years ago, as a 16-year-old meat-loving teenager who wore a snazzy hat. Wendy and I sure had grown up in different ways, and I didn't mind. The road stretched on and on for hours, guiding us through the barren land like on rails. Every once in a while we would pass a conglomerate of mailboxes, closely huddled together, as if they wanted to show strength in numbers to their potential natural enemies in the wasteland. I still haven't figured out who they were afraid of, as drunk driving college kids with baseball bats are certainly far, far away from a place like this. Next to the mailboxes there would usually be a couple of gravel trails forking off the main road, leading straight into the horizon. We could occasionally see some shacks in the distance and small patches of land where work had been done to accommodate humans. A popular architecture among the desert people seemed to be the geodesic dome, which looked very futuristic in a Mad Max sense. I could see myself staying at a place like this for a month or so every year, alone with only a modular synthesizer, a camera and a laptop, creating weird audio-visual art while I watched the stars completely sober and experienced true loneliness. Light pollution out here was almost non-existent, and our host for the night, who let us sleep in his vintage Shasta trailer, recommended to stay on the porch a while longer to witness the great spectacle about to start above. We bought some beer and ice cream at the local gas station and quickly drove back to get comfortable before the show, which did not disappoint. Looking up to the wildly sparkling sky with complete darkness surrounding us on the ground felt similar to floating in the ocean, face down in the water, entering a completely unusual element for the modern city dweller's mind and body. An experience I can only recommend. Having been exposed to streaming on-demand music services for so long, there has been a certain amount of neglect towards the traditional radio, especially the AM frequencies. It came as a surprise to find a local national park station there, broadcasting pre-recorded announcements, general facts and historical stories about the area we were passing through. With no other cars around us, it felt as if we had our own personal guide in the back seat, and we wondered how many of those unusual media offerings we had missed on our travels so far. History in the park, it seems, had been plagued with misfortune, deceit and violence, however, as the beautiful and rich lands had always been of great importance for various disputing parties of indigenous civilizations and foreign settlers over the decades. The story ended abruptly when we exited the park gates and we changed the channel to conservative Christian talk radio, where the screaming hosts delivered a hilarious yet also depressing listening experience new to us as well. The bag of chocolates didn't last long on this leg of the trip. A Western film set had not been on the list of important venues to visit, but it was a welcome attraction nevertheless. There was no tumbleweed bouncing by, but even without it the place could not have looked any more deserted. We strolled up and down between the wooden fronts of a saloon, a sheriff's office and an old grocery store. Feeling unobserved, we horsed around, taking a few boringly half-assed selfies, when we realized that the buildings had enough depth to them to house actual tiny gift shops, with the employees' eyes following us from the inside. We avoided any contact and did not stay long. Approaching our last destination on this road trip, huge and busy Los Angeles, came with a slight civilization shock after weeks with only brief visits to populated areas. After 4 road trips through the States now, we were still not saturated with the experience, and while sipping on a smoothie through a biodegradable straw after playing a rundown Elvis pinball machine at Santa Monica Pier, we made plans to come back yet again. It would be another trip to remember, which would lead us even further into unknown lands and cultures, and there would also be yurts.